Hello, everyone. Welcome to a long-awaited episode of the unofficial Magic the Gathering audiobooks podcast. I'm Phil Dawson, and I'm so happy you're here and thankful for your patience. My hope is to get another chapter out tomorrow. I will try my best, but I had to get one out today. Had a little bit of free time. I've been as busy as I've ever been. As most of you know, starting a brewery here in Japan, and well, we have started brewing. This has been a 10-year journey to get to this point, and the first thing we did was start brewing every day for the last 2 weeks and working on making our brewery operational. We got our license on like the 30th of November and started making beer a week later and have been at it ever since. And this also means our restaurant business about to start up too. Our grand opening is actually January 19th, 2024, and here in Sendai. And it's just like amazing to think it's actually happening. I'm in this whirlwind of emotions and drive and like learning new things every day as I've been a studious and very theoretical brewer for these last 10 years with some experience in there, but it's full on high learning curve as we go from that theoretical to practical, if you know what I mean. I'm actually doing the work instead of planning it or thinking or imagining it. It's go time and it's been incredible. I have a great mentor and partner by my side, so it's all going great. I've even designed and brewed my first beer and hoping it turns out great. Uh, anyway, in terms of brewing my first beer as a like professional brewer, right? So that's why I'm on this little hiatus from the show. And yes, we're hitting Christmas and New Year's, and you'll never guess what. You listeners are the first to know, besides my family, but my wife is pregnant again. And so that means in like June, I'll be welcoming in number two to the family, which is another big life changing event. So when it rains, it pours. But it's like pours of joy and beer, of course. So like it's very good rain. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about right now, but that's you. If you follow along, it's very good. It's great. So I really want to say thank you to all of our patrons. I'm 100% serious. I cannot do this without you. I need your support through all of this. You're that nice, warm, comforting blanket as I try to keep bulldozing through and enjoying this ride. And I promise I'll be catching up on everything when I have the time. I'm good for it. Been doing this, here we are, year number 2, right? Year number 3. I need to review our podcast goals as well and set new ones for next year, which we did pretty good, I think, this year. I got to make some new merch. I think a rebrand is all in order and all that's in store. Plus, getting out the goods for the Loyalty Rewards Club. I appreciate you. I'll get you. Don't worry. And let's get into some Magic lore now, okay? I want to say thank you for hanging with me. Follow me on Instagram, Phil and Sendai. Love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Talk soon. Let's go. Chapter 5. The dark water spread out in a V behind Aurum as she swam. Ripples ran away from her across the lagoon's surface. A few shafts of sunlight reflected off the water, glinting in the evening air. It was, as nearly as Aurum could determine, about a month since her capture by the Cho Aurum. On the forest floor, it was difficult to be certain of the passage of day and night. The light was always the same soft, gray glow of the tree trunks. Within the village, a fire burned at all times, and the Cho Aurum moved about it, immersed in their everyday routines. Aurum slept when she was tired and awoke feeling rested and refreshed, but she had no idea whether she had been asleep 2 hours or 10. Perhaps the best measure of how much time had passed was how well she had picked up the Cho Aurum language. Total immersion had taught her many words very quickly. Total immersion. She dove deep and swam through dark spaces. Aurum now had full run of the settlement without accompanying guards. They would have been a useless expenditure of manpower, since Aurum had no idea in which direction lay the forest's edge. If she went the wrong way and became lost, the Cho Aurum told her, she would wander endlessly down the aisles of tall trees and never again feel the wind on her face. Certainly the forest looked the same to her whenever she walked, hoary, shaggy, vast, and vaguely threatening. Her sole clear landmarks were the village and the lagoon that bordered it, the lagoon whose waters seemed to swell and recede according to some strange rhythm. Odd sounds came from the water occasionally, noises too deep and remote to come from human or animal throats. She surfaced. A few hundred feet from where Orm swam, Weatherlight floated peacefully. Figures moved casually on the upper deck. One waved to Orm, and she waved back. For these folk, Weatherlight was not a ship, it was an oracle. Even down here among the trees, they had glimpsed Weatherlight's cometary arrival across the sky and had believed the airship to be their god Ramos. An old myth told of Ramos falling from the heavens and breaking into pieces, soul, mind, and body. All the evils of Mercadia rose from his broken being. A prophecy told that Ramos would return, and if soul, mind, and body were reunited, he would unite the world and drive the evil away. To these folk, Weatherlight was not a warship, but something altogether more valuable. It was a holy relic, the soul of a god. There was no arguing with gods or their believers. Orm no longer tried to disabuse these folks of their strange notions about the ship. She only waved and smiled at the soldiers, turned and swam for shore. In the roots of the tree where she'd left her clothes, the healer found Ishada, her arms clasped about shapely knees, dark hair pulled back in a braid. She giggled as Orm shivered. "I told you it was too cold." "Cold water can be good for you," Orm said serenely. "At the university, we used to pour cold water over ourselves every morning and evening. In the winter, we had to break the ice on the surface." Ishada's giggles grew louder. "You're young and foolish. I'm young and sensible. You won't catch me swimming for at least another month. What was the university?" Orm had become accustomed to Ishada's rapid-fire questions. At first, when she only vaguely understood their meaning, she had labored over her answers, provoking still more questions and frustration on both sides. Now the healer had learned to pick and choose the questions to which she supplied detailed replies. Ishada never stopped asking, though. "The university was a place at which I studied my art. My friend Hannah studied there as well." "Hannah?" Ishada exclaimed. "What is she like? Is she pretty like you? Did she study the healing arts as you did? Where was the university?" "Hannah is very pretty," Orm replied. She had not thought of Weatherlight's navigator in some time. Ishada's question conjured up a mental picture of Hannah, her face grimy with grease, bent eagerly over a dissected component of the ship's engine. But pretty, always pretty. "She was not a healer, though. At the university, she studied artifacts." "What is an artifact?" Orm laughed. "It's an artifact, a magical object." She pointed toward the ship. "Weatherlight is an artifact." Ishada's eyes, always expressive, grew round and wide. "An artifact? Really? It's more than that, much more." "Yes," Orm replied, her eyes far away. "Yes, on that we agree." Ishada looked troubled. "I think we should not speak of this." She lay back and watched as Orm bound her turban around her head. "Why do you wear your hair like that? It conceals your beauty." "It marks my status as a healer," Orm replied. Ishada looked serious. "Yes, you healed me that horrible night. Do you have Chavala?" "What is Chavala?" Ishada hesitated, struggling for the right words. "It is a gift from above," she replied slowly. "It is not given often, but those who possess it stand high in the favor of the tribe and the gods. Takunst is so marked." Orm put out a hand and pulled the younger woman to her feet. "Come on, let's get back to the village before they think I've run off." As they made their way through the trees, both women greeted the tribesmen they passed. Some sat instudiously by the side of the lagoon, pulling gently on fishing nets. Much of the Cho'arum diet consisted of fish, supplemented by fruits, berries, and vegetables collected from various parts of the forest. Orm had not tasted red meat since she had been among the tribe, and she found the change a welcome one. As a rule, Cho'arum preferred the cool, pale light that came from lanterns that each home possessed, or the gentle silver light of the forest itself. Tonight, though, the bonfire burning in the middle of the village was heaped high with fuel, driving away the cold and shadows. Around the fire, a large group had gathered. Orm and Ishada approached curiously, and the younger woman gave a delightful clap of her hands. "It's the Sipari, the storytellers. They're about to start." There were 7 Sipari, 3 women and 4 men. They looked no different from the other Cho'arum Orm had met, but the village tribesfolk surrounded them, chatting cheerfully. One by one, villagers found seats around the fire. The very old and young were wrapped in shawls and blankets. Orm and Ishada settled in among them. The Sipari began to perform. Around the fire they went, each carrying 2 masks, which they alternated as they assumed different characters. For the most part, the stories were simple fables, easy to follow, mostly comic. Orm laughed with the rest of the village, and when she had any trouble understanding, Ishada curled up cat-like at her side and explained. In time, there came a short pause. The players gathered in front of the fire, upon which several villagers stacked more wood so that it blazed with a sudden ferocity. Then the Sipari began another play. This was evidently not comic, and Orm had more difficulty following the action. It concerned some great conflict, for two men stood opposite one another, moving their hands in complex rhythms, and their minions battled. Sometimes the fighters pretended to wield swords or spears. Other times they moved swiftly as if imitating machines that hacked and clawed at one another. The two sides separated, and Orm saw that the man on one side had been joined by a woman, from whose mask flowed a tangle of vines dyed bright red to simulate hair. On the opposing side were two figures, both male. In the middle, two Sipari surrounded a female, her mask trailing green vines. She swirled the tendrils around her, a whirling cloud of green and yellow. As the motions of the opposing men became more intense, supported by the players at their side, the woman in the middle gradually sank to her knees. Her motions became slower, then ceased altogether. Something about the performance touched the very edge of Orm's memory. Dimly she recalled similar events, mighty conflict between rival magicians, conflict that ended in tragedy and death. She had heard the story back at the Argivian University, sitting in the library on a gloomy winter day, glancing through an obscure, age-old poem. Recognition came in sudden shock. It's the Brothers' War. What? Ishada had been lying on her stomach, intent on the play. The Brothers' War! Orm slapped her hand against Ishada's foot in excitement. I learned this legend at the university. Two brothers, Urza and Mishra, fought a war against one another on the continent of Terrasayer. During the latter part of the war, they invaded the island of Argoth and fought until it was devastated. We were taught that the spirit of nature in Argoth died when the brothers had completed their battle. Then there was a huge explosion that killed both brothers and ended the war. Ishada was plainly uninterested about her friend's story. That's not what this is about, she said, turning back to the figures by the fire. Watch. The battle was reaching a climax. The gestures had become more violent. The red-haired woman slowly crossed the space between the two principal figures, her arms outstretched. Her former ally, whose mask was painted in dark, handsome features, lifted his hands and clapped. The red-haired woman dropped to the ground. The dark man lifted his arms in a gesture of triumph. He hefted 3 great stones waiting beside the fire, set them on his back, and began a whirling dance around the flames. At the height of one turn, he seemed struck by something, and the 3 stones flew outward, dropping among the fallen folk. Then the man himself collapsed. All the Sipari lay still on the ground now, save one, wearing a golden mask, who stepped over their bodies. She reached down and touched the earth of the fallen. At her touch, each one rose. Finally, when all were standing, they wove back and forth in an intricate dance until they last joined in a single entity. This episode brought the play to an end. The Sipari discarded their masks and stood grinning among the platitudes of the watching Cho-Aram. Orm clapped with the rest of the crowd and then turned to Ishada. All right, what is it about? Ishada shrugged. It is the Pelium, the origin story, she said. It tells us where everything came from and to where we will return when we die. All right, said Orm after a pause. Tell me. Ishada spoke as if talking to a child. The fight was between 2 gods, Ramos and Orhop. Each had pulled down a piece of the heavens, and each sought to use it to best the other. In the end, Ramos triumphed, and Orhop, the evil god, was vanquished. Ramos grieved for the ruin he had brought to his world, and so he gathered the people of forest and plain and mountain and set them on his back and carried them to a new world, a better world. But when he arrived, he was struck from the sky and fell in 3 great pieces, soul, mind, and body. Born atop his soul, the tribes of the Cho-Aram landed in the forests. Those atop his mind, the Saprazans, fell into the oceans, and those atop his body, some fell from the fiery corpse and struck the coastal lands, and they became the Rishadans. Those who held on to the blazing body were slain and lie now guarding the bones of Ramos. That is why when we die, we return to the heavens, the place from which we came. Once there, we're joined in the great river that runs amongst the stars until the last of it falls off the edge of the world into the great everlasting dark. Orm nodded thoughtfully. And who in the play was the red-haired woman? A demon who pretended to support Ramos in the conflict. In the end, she betrayed him, but he defeated her and so won the war. Her name was Hasno, the Unrighteous. And the last part of the play? Though the children of Ramos, Cho-Aram, Rishadan, Saprazan, were scattered through the forest, plain, and sea, Someday will come the Uniter. He'll be the great metal serpent. When he returns, all the children of Ramos will be joined as one and will triumph over our enemies. Ishada said with conviction. And you believe Weatherlight is the soul of this Uniter? Ishada pushed back the dark hair that framed her heart-shaped face. You'd have to ask Cho Mano. You know, there were other folk who thought the owner of Weatherlight was a Uniter. The Corvette doll. The woman only shrugged. Truth is truth, wherever it is found. Orem startled awake from a nightmare. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had dreamed of monsters, inhuman beasts with 4 arms, boar heads, scorpion tails. They scaled the vast forest wall where tree trunks formed a barrier 100 feet high. The monsters leaped upward as nimble and bloodthirsty as fleas. They loped into the nighttime wood. Whenever they encountered a creature, whether coney, fox, or wumpus, or red wolf, the monsters fell upon it, tore it to pieces, ate their victims' innards, and flung away bone and muscle to rot. Their claws girdled ancient trees. Their talons tore up undergrowth. Worst of all, they arrowed straight through the forest toward the Choarm village. Just a nightmare, Orem said to herself, panting and clutching a hand to her chest. Her bed of leaves and moss lay warm and familiar beneath her. Solid walls of wood enclosed her. Ishada's room was just down the corridor and Chomano's beyond. She was safe. Just a nightmare. Feet came along the passage, probably Ishada's, checking on her. You're awake, came a man's voice, basso in the darkness. Chomano, Orem gasped, grabbing a robe from a hook on the wall and holding it over herself. What are you doing? You dream it too, he interrupted. His eyes glinted in the dark. That's good. The Rushwood is getting its roots in you. You had the same nightmare. Yes. Mercenaries, monsters. They must be Catarans, Chomano answered. But it was not a dream. The Rushwoods. It's not just a dream. The monsters are coming. Orem stood. Where can we flee? They can run and climb. We do not flee. We fight. The forest awoke us to mount a defense. Even now, it awakes other defenders. Ancient things that have not walked the land in centuries, but they rouse slowly. We must go. We are the first line of defense. We? Orem asked, astonished. I'm not a fighter. You are a healer like Takanst. The forest dreams in you, as in him, Chavala. But there are fighters. There must be healers. Dropping her robes, Orem donned her healer's cloak, slipped on her leggings and boots, wrapped the turban around her sleep-tousled hair. I'm ready. Good, Chomano said, holding his hand out in the darksome room. She saw then that he himself wore only a loincloth. My armor and sword wait by the door. Already the Sky Scouts and wizards are on their way. Orem took his hand. It was strong and warm. Salty scent enveloped him. Let us fight for the Rushwood. Coney Fox darted, shrieking. Ears lay back along its shoulders. Gray haunches pumped furiously. Claws flung up the mossy ground. Hunks of lichen smacked the fangs of its pursuer. The monstrous thing came on, heedless. Eyes glowed yellow, deviltry in the night. Mandibles thrashed hungrily, 4 arms raked out after its prey. Taloned feet tore the ground, a barb-tipped appendage stabbed down, pinning the Coney Fox bushy tail. With another shriek, the terrified creature yanked free, leaving half of its tail behind. It bled. Each bound flung a sanguine trail behind it. The monster would never give up now. It would follow the blood path across the forest floor. It was doomed. To ground, every Coney Fox knew to go to ground to die. It vaulted over a root tangle and scrambled down into the vast hole that opened on the other side. Darkness lay ahead. The silver glow of the tree trunks receded. The Coney Fox bounded down a worn trail among roots. There was a strong smell ahead. Another creature layered down here, a creature with massive claws, a scaly gray hide, huge muscles, a crouched and lumbering thing. Its mouth was filled with blunt, plant-eating teeth. This beast was a protector. The Coney Fox leaped beneath it, flushing it from cover. The lumbering satyr jumped up the side of the hollow just as the fang monster plunged down it. The satyr lunged atop the Cataran enforcer. Quicker and crueler, the Cataran bit open the beast's belly and started feasting. In its dying gasps, the satyr clasped the Cataran's legs and yanked them apart as though it were breaking a wishbone. A messy moment followed, then one dead beast collapsed atop the other. The Coney Fox cowered silently below. More fanged horrors vaulted over the pit and raced on into the deep forest. By the time Orym, Chomano, Takarnst, and Taspan arrived at the battleground, the forest was bathed in blood. Red shafts jutted from the bellies and brain pans of fallen monsters, boar-headed men, demon-eyed beasts, four-armed killers, things with scorpion tails, snake bodies, roach legs. They lay thick across the ground behind the battle lines. Scores more had broken through, crashing against hastily entrenched Cho'Arm warriors. Black armor bashed black carapace, darting swords of bone parried darting stingers of poison. The Cho'Arm were outnumbered 4-1, but they bravely fought on. Unarmored archers even waded into the midst, their arrows leaping a mere arm's length to pierce fiendish eyes. The Cho'Arm made a valiant stand, but more inhuman monsters rushed from the dark woods. The four-arm monster ripped the armor from one warrior's chest, plunged its claws through skin and muscle, and ribbed and pierced the flailing heart within. A boar-headed beast drove its tusks up beneath a woman's jaw, impaling her, whipping her back and forth until her chin ripped off. Scorpion Man sunk its stingers in an archer's eyes and smiled lustfully as it pumped its red venom into his brain. "Got to get down there," Orym gasped, clawing forward over a mossy root bulb. Chomano's hand pulled her back.
"No! Wait here with Takarnst. My healers die, my warriors are doomed. First, let us drive them back, then you emerge to tend the wounded."
Drawing his bone sword, Chomano strode down the embankment. Beside him went Taspan, gigantic executioner who had slain Klars. Taspan bore a massive spiked mace on his shoulder. Soon those spikes would be running in blood. "Drive them back?" Orym worried aloud as she watched the men's broad armored shoulders. "How could they possibly drive them back?" Young and lithe beside her, Takarnst pointed to a rise of wood that overlooked the battlefield. "Watch, the wizards have arrived." "What good is water magic in a dry place?"
"No place is truly dry,"
Takarnst said.
"Look."
A spell leaped in white ribbons down from the hillside. It surged toward the center of the battle, where the four-armed beast tore apart warrior after warrior. The monster stood in a small swale between roots. Blood mantled the creature and filled the spot to cover its talons. Tendrils of force plunged into the blood pool, coiling through it, enlivening it. The sanguine vortex rose. As it gathered more liquid, the vortex formed into a man of blood. With no sword, no armor, the man rammed his gory fist down the Cataran's throat. His arm followed to the elbow, to the shoulder. "What's it doing?"
"Drowning the beast in blood,"
Takarnst said. Gagging, clutching its throat, the Cataran fell to its knees. Red bubbles gushed from its mouth, and it sank down in the pool of blood surrounding it. Gore disgorged from the monster's nostrils and mouth. The pool churned again, another vortex rising. The blood warrior drew more power from the pool and strode out to attack a second beast.
"We are, after all, creatures filled with water," Takarnst said. "But we are not the only ones. See?"
Another spell lashed down from the wizards on the hill. Fingers of mist reached out and wrapped around a boar-headed invader. Droplets of water condensed out of air and soaked into the beast's hide. Moments later, steam issued from its every pore. The monster shuddered. Flesh seemed to boil. It opened its mouth to bellow, but only steam jetted angrily forth. With it came the unmistakable scent of roast boar. It, too, collapsed. As more magic rode down from the hilltop, Chomano and his warriors made brutal work of the beasts. The chieftain strode angrily against the foes, driving his sword into bellies and hearts and eyes. Taspan's mace had become an aspergillum that laved the battlefield in blood. Beside him fought the blood warrior, empowered by the red rain in the air. No new monsters joined the fray, and those already fighting fell back before the Cho'Arm defenders.
"Now they are trapped,"
Takarnst said, gesturing behind the lines of beasts. From the treetops, on cords as long and sleek as spiderwebs, dropped the Sky Scouts. Others glided down on capes that draped from ankles to wrist. They reached the ground and drew their swords. In moments, as many Cho'Arm stood behind the beasts as before them. The battlefield had become a vice.
"Let's go,"
Orym said. She vaulted over the root cluster and ran down the slope. Takarnst followed behind. They reached the first of the fallen warriors, many of them dead. For those who lived, there were bandages, salves, opiates to deaden local pain, and soporifics to bring sleep. The work was brutal and busy. The number of wounded was overwhelming. Lacerations, amputations, eviscerations, poisonings. Orym worked over her 9th patient when Chomano strode by her side.
"The battle is won,"
he said heavily. "I'm still fighting mine," Orym replied, cinching a tourniquet on a ruined arm. Panting, she asked, "Do we even know who the attackers were? Where they came from?" Chomano stooped, helping to tie the tourniquet in place.
"They were Cataran mercenaries, as I thought. They were hired by the Mercadians."
Shaking her head bitterly, Orym hissed,
"Mercadians!
They are not among the children of Ramos, are they?
No. Their origin is different than ours. The forest knows them now. They will not win so far inward again. As soon as Mercadians harm the forest again, greater powers will arise. The forest itself will destroy them.
Vicious monsters. Why are the Mercadians attacking us?
Jomano's eyes were dark in his handsome face.
They came to capture Weatherlight.